Mr. President, on behalf of the Armed Services Committee, I'm pleased to bring S-1390, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2010, to the Senate floor. This bill will fully fund the fiscal year 2010 budget request of $680 billion for national security activities in the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. The Senate Armed Services Committee has a long tradition of setting aside partisanship and working together in the interest of the national defense. This year follows that tradition. I'm pleased that S-1390 was reported to the Senate on a unanimous 26-0 vote of the committee. This vote stands as a testament to the common commitment of all of our members to supporting our men and women in uniform. I particularly want to thank Senator McCain, our ranking minority member, for his strong support throughout the committee process, and of course for the dedication that he has shown to the national defense throughout his Senate career. Earlier this year, the Armed Services Committee reported out the Weapons Systems Acquisition Reform Act of 2009 with similar bipartisan support. In less than 2 months, we were able to get the bill passed by the Senate, complete conference with the House, and have the President sign it into law. It's my hope that we'll be able to move with similar dispatch on the bill now before us. This bill contains many important provisions that will improve the quality of life of our men and women in uniform, provide needed support and assistance to our troops on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan, make the investments we need to meet the challenges of the 21st century, and require needed reforms in the management of the Department of Defense. First and foremost, the bill before us continues the increases in compensation and quality of life that our servicemen and women and their families deserve as they face the hardships imposed by continuing military operations around the world. For example, the bill contains provisions that would first authorize a 3.4% across-the-board pay raise for all uniformed military personnel, and that represents a 0.5% more than the budget request and the annual rate of inflation. The bill authorizes a 30,000 increase in the Army's active duty end strength during fiscal years 2011 and 2012 in order to increase dwell time and reduce the stress created by repeated deployments. The bill authorizes payment of over 25 types of bonuses and special pays aimed at encouraging enlistment, re-enlistment, and continued service by active duty and reserve military personnel. We increased the authorization for the Homeowners Assistance Program by $350 million in order to provide relief to homeowners in the armed forces who are required to relocate because of base closures or change of station orders. And we increased the maximum amount of supplemental subsistence allowance from $500 to $1,100 per month to ensure that service members and their families do not have to be dependent on food stamps. The bill also includes important funding and authorities needed to provide our troops the equipment and support that they'll continue to need as long as they remain on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan. For example, the bill contains provisions that would provide $6.7 billion for the Mine-Resistant Ambush Protected, the MRAP Vehicle Fund, including an increase of $1.2 billion above the President's budget request for MRAP all-terrain vehicles, which will be deployed in Afghanistan. The bill fully funds the President's budget request for U.S. Special Operations Command and adds $131 million for unfunded requirements identified by the Commander of Special Operations Command. The bill provides full funding for the Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Organization to continue the development and deployment of technologies to defeat these attacks. And we provide nearly $7.5 billion to train and equip the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police so that they can carry more of the burden of defending their own country against the Taliban. The bill would also implement most of the budget recommendations made by the Secretary of Defense to terminate troubled programs and apply the savings to higher priority activities of the department. For example, the bill will terminate the Air Force Combat Search and Rescue Helicopter Program, CSAR-X. It will terminate the VH-71 presidential helicopter. It would cancel and restructure the manned ground vehicle portion of the Army's Future Combat Systems program. It would stop the growth of the Army Brigade Combat Teams, the BCTs, at 45 instead of 48, while maintaining the planned increase in end strength. It would end production of the C-17 program. It would terminate the multiple kill vehicle program, cancel the kinetic energy interceptor, cancel the second airborne laser prototype aircraft, and would authorize $900 million of additional funding in the budget request to field more theater missile defense systems, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, the THAAD, and the Standard Missile 3 interceptors, and converting additional Aegis ships for missile defense to defend our forward-deployed forces and allies against the many short and medium-range missiles held by countries such as North Korea and Iran. The bill supports the decision of Secretary Gates to stop deployment of the ground-based interceptors at 30 missiles and to focus on improving the capability of this system to be more reliable and effective than the current system against the limited threat of long-range missiles. The bill also supports the decision to continue production of those ground-based interceptors that are on contract and to use them as test missiles and as spares. By fielding the most modern version of the interceptor, using modern silos, and conducting operationally realistic testing with the additional missiles instead of putting them in silos, the system will provide, in Secretary Gates's words, a robust capability that is fully adequate to protect us against a North Korean threat for a number of years. According to testimony to the committee, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the combatant commanders agreed that their highest priority for the GMD, the Ground Missile Defense System, was to have 30 interceptors with improved reliability, availability, and effectiveness. The bill before us again supports Secretary Gates's decision to field that improved capability. Now, I'm disappointed that the committee voted on a very close vote not to terminate the F-22 aircraft production program as requested by the Secretary of Defense and is supported by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I plan to join with Senator McCain in seeking to overturn that decision during floor consideration of this bill. Finally, the bill contains a number of provisions that will help improve the management of the Department of Defense and federal agencies, other federal agencies. For example, the bill contains provisions that would first improve Department of Defense financial management by requiring the department to engage in business process reengineering before acquiring new information technology systems and to submit regular reports on its progress towards auditable financial statements. Second, it requires the Department of Defense to develop a comprehensive plan to address longstanding problems in its inventory management systems, which lead it to acquire and store hundreds of millions of dollars worth of unneeded items. Third, it places a moratorium on public-private competitions under OMB Circular A-76 until the department complies with an existing statutory requirement to develop information needed to manage its service contractors, plan for its civilian employee workforce, and identify functions that would be subject to public-private competition. And fourth, we would authorize the Secretary to establish a new Defense Civilian Leadership Program to help recruit, train, and retain highly qualified civilian employees to help lead the Department of Defense over the next 20 years. A very important provision in this bill is Section 1031, which would address the problems that exist with military commissions. The military commissions provisions that we have in law today do not provide basic guarantees of fairness identified by our Supreme Court. The existing provisions place a cloud, therefore, over military commissions and have led some to conclude that the use of military commissions can never be fair, credible, or consistent with our basic principles of justice. Earlier this year, the President stated that military commissions can be reformed to meet basic standards of fairness needed for them to play a legitimate role in prosecuting violations of the law of war. In his May 21, 2009 speech at the National Archives, President Obama stated that, quote, military commissions have a history in the United States dating back to George Washington and the Revolutionary War. They are an appropriate venue, he said, for trying detainees for violations of the laws of war. They allow for the protection of sensitive sources and methods of intelligence gathering. They allow for the safety and security of participants and for the presentation of evidence gathered from the battlefield that cannot always be effectively presented in federal courts. And the President continued, instead of using the flawed commissions of the last 7 years, my administration is bringing our commissions in line with the rule of law. We will make our military commissions a more credible and effective means of administering justice, and I will work with Congress and members of both parties, as well as legal authorities across the political spectrum, on legislation to ensure that these commissions are fair, legitimate, and effective, close quote. Well, we agree with the President, and Section 1031 reflects our determination to reform the commissions. In its 2006 decision in the Hamden case, the Supreme Court held that Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions requires that the trial of detainees for violations of the law of war be conducted in a manner consistent with the procedures applicable in trials by courts-martial, and that any deviation from those procedures be justified by, quote, evident practical need, close quote. The Supreme Court said that, quote, the uniformity principle is not an inflexible one. It does not preclude all departures from the procedures dictated for use by courts-martial, but any departure must be tailored to the exigency that necessitates it, close quote. That is the standard that the Armed Services Committee has tried to apply in adopting the procedures for military commissions that we have included in our bill. This new language addresses a long series of problems with the procedures currently in law. For example, relative to the admissibility of coerced testimony, the provision in our bill would eliminate the double standard in existing law under which coerced statements are admissible if they were obtained prior to December 30, 2005. They would be inadmissible regardless of when the coercion occurred. Relative to the use of hearsay evidence, the provision in our bill would eliminate the extraordinary language in the existing law which places the burden on detainees to prove that hearsay evidence introduced against them is not reliable and probative. Relative to the issue of access to classified evidence and exculpatory evidence, the provision in our bill would eliminate the unique procedures and requirements which have hampered the ability of defense teams to obtain information and which have led to so much litigation. We would substitute more established procedures based on the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, with modest changes to ensure that the government cannot be required to disclose classified information to unauthorized persons. Now, even if we're able to enact new legislation that successfully addresses the problems in existing law, we will have a ways to go to restore public confidence in military commissions and the justice that they produce. However, we will not be able to restore confidence in military commissions at all unless we first substitute new procedures and language to address the problems with the existing statute. As of today, Mr. President, we have almost 130,000 U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on the ground in Iraq. Over the course of the next fiscal year, we will undertake the difficult task of drawing down these Iraqi numbers while maintaining security and stability on the ground. And at the same time, we have increased our forces in Afghanistan with close to 60,000 troops engaged in increasingly active combat and combat support operations, and more are on the way. While there are many issues where there may not be a consensus, we all know, and there is a consensus on this, that we must provide our troops the support that they need as long as they remain in harm's way. Senate action on the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2010 will improve the quality of life for our men and women in uniform. It will give them the tools that they need to remain the most effective fighting force in the world. And very importantly, it will send an important message that we, as a nation, stand behind them and are deeply grateful for their service. So we look forward to working with colleagues to pass this important legislation. And again, I want to thank Senator McCain for all he and his staff have done to bring this bill to the floor.